Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar in the second of our series about evidence generation for digital health. The title today, How do digital health companies navigate the evidence generation maze? As you'll all be aware, I think digital health companies face a bewildering array of questions, organizations, and regulations as they embark on their evidence generation journey. This morning's webinar will present and critically discuss the experiences of companies which have achieved varying degrees of success and consider ways to improve the pathway. We're really delighted that you have all taken the time to register and to join us today, together with our panel of entrepreneurs from three leading digital health tech companies, each with a different perspective on the maze. They've kindly agreed to share their experiences and reflections and to join in a discussion and question and answer session with you about what could help to make the pathway less tortuous and more transparent. So my name is Paul Wallace. I'm a GP by background, Professor Emeritus of Primary Care at UCL, and the Clinical Director for Digital at South London Academic Health Science Network, which is also called the HIN. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Professor Henry Potts from the UCL Institute of Health Informatics, and by Dr. Jean Ledger, who is a senior researcher at UCL. The series is brought to you as a collaboration between UCL, DigitalHealth.London, MedCity, and the Health Innovation Network. Our initial discussion with our panel will last about 30 minutes, with a further 20 minutes for Q&As with all of you. So please write any questions or comments you have for our experts in the chat box, which Henry and Jean will be monitoring. And please do, not like me, switch off your phones. You can also use Twitter and the hashtag #EvaluateDigiHealth. So to our panelists today, we have Adam Hunter, Board Director, Flow Digital Pharmacy, Elliot Engers, CEO and co-founder of Infinity Health, and Charlotte Lee, who is the UK Director of Big Health, which is the parent company for Sleepio. Welcome to our panel. To begin with, can I ask each of you to tell us briefly, maybe in 2 minutes or less, about your company and your product? Charlotte, would you like to, Elliot, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks, Paul. My name's Elliot. I'm from Infinity Health. We're a task management solution for health and care. So we're really focused on that last mile of healthcare where doctors and nurses and allied health professionals come together to coordinate care for patients. That's currently reliant very heavily on outdated modes of communication, paper, fax, pages, face-to-face meetings, verbal communication. So we built a solution that allows staff to log, update, share tasks for patients in real time. And this has many benefits across sort of like efficiency savings, better outcomes for patients, better experiences for patients and staff, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Currently handle on the order of about 2 million tasks a year for the NHS.
Thanks, Elliot. Charlotte.
Hi everyone, I'm Charlotte, UK Director for Big Health. Nice to meet you. I speak 3 languages, so I'm a trained doctor, I've worked in healthcare consulting, and I've supported SMEs through the Digital Health Accelerator Programme. So at Big Health, we are a digital therapeutics company focused on treating poor mental health. And our mission is to help millions back to good mental health. And how do we do that? So we reimagine CBT as engaging, destigmatized digital therapy. We put our products Daylight for anxiety and Sleepio for insomnia through the toughest clinical trials and prove that they're safe and effective. And we work with the best healthcare systems in the world, in my opinion, to bring millions back to good mental health, like the NHS.
Thanks, Charlotte. We're going to be hearing more from each of you in a minute. But Adam, can you tell us a bit about Flow Digital?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name's Adam Hunter. I work at Flow Digital Pharmacy. We're the UK's first online pharmacy providing an on-demand, same-day delivery service of NHS and private prescriptions from our pharmacy to your door. across London in under 4 hours. So really quite a simplistic way to access both your NHS and private prescriptions. Patients can sign up at weareflow.com and manage both acute and repeat prescriptions within the London area and across wider England. We also work as well with other healthcare providers, digital health companies who are looking for an integrated pharmacy service within their platform as well. So a bit of direct to consumer and also B2B partnerships as well with other healthcare providers.
Well, thank you all very much indeed. I'm going to go to the first question now about evidence generation. Often not a priority when companies start out, but let's explore what importance your companies initially attached to evidence generation and how, if at all, that's changed with time. Charlotte, can we start with you?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm still quite new within Big Health. I'm about 2 years old, I would say, within the world of Big Health, but it's actually a 10-year-old company. And, you know, to Paul's question, evidence was absolutely core to the development of Sleepio. So Sleepio is our first product developed for insomnia. And it was really because our co-founder, Professor Espy, spent 30 years before he founded Sleepio trying to get CBT for insomnia delivered in primary care. No matter how he did it, it didn't seem to stick. So he worked with Peter Haynes, our other co-founder, to develop Sleepio, fully automated digital therapy. But because he had an academic background, you know, he was professor of sleep medicine at Glasgow at the time, and now he's at Oxford, you know, we didn't launch Sleepio until it had its first RCT. And that's certainly the story for the first, I would say, you know, 5 or 6 years, where we really focused on developing rigorous clinical trials for our products, and Sleepio now has 12 RCTs. Since I joined, and with a lot of the insights that I gained from the DigitalHealth.London accelerator team, we started to expand our evidence base. And so we looked at real world evidence. So could we achieve the same clinical outcomes in the real world with a real world implementation model, and also with health economics? So what was the exact impact on cost, whether that's cost savings or cost effectiveness in a real world system, and for who? So that allowed us to then try and identify product market fit within the NHS.
Thanks, Charlotte. And we're going to come back to this, I think, but it's an interesting one. Your company started with in fact, a series of large randomized controlled trials, and people often think that that is the only way to go. And interesting that you've come back to look at real world data and the importance of that. And I think we'll hear from Adam and Elliot different approaches to this, and I think that's what the trying to understand the maze is all about. Adam, I know that Flo has had a different experience of that. Tell us what importance Flo has initially attached to evidence generation and how that's changed with time.
Yeah, I think, you know, Flow is we're an NHS authorised pharmacy, so it's a slightly complicated ecosystem in that effectively the NHS will pay for the prescriptions, but actually it's a patient-led choice. So if you're not delivering a service that is suitable and reliable and convenient to the patient, then they can move to a different online pharmacy or maybe a bricks and mortar pharmacy. So although we're governed and we're paid by the NHS, our relationships are direct with our patients. So for Flo, our laser focus in our business is, are we providing an excellent patient service and an excellent patient experience? And actually, when we first started, when the company was first started by Nadeem Sarwar, the founder, our idea was to replicate what is quite common in the marketplace at the moment, which is your mail order, next day, 3 days, 4-day delivery cycles. But we actually, by talking to patients who might use an online service, it was quite clear they were uncomfortable receiving their medication in the post. So that allowed us right from the beginning to actually pivot the business more to what Flow is now, which is having these pharmacies in city centre hubs that can deliver medication to patients within a couple of hours that they can track in real time on their phone, much like you can track a delivery order or an Uber order to your door. So really our focus at the very beginning was because what does the patient need? What are the patient pain points with the existing pharmacy service? And can Flow offer something that will help address those pain points and help with their contribution to the overall healthcare system? So yeah, research at the beginning was really, really important to us because actually it fundamentally changed the business model of Flow.
So a different take, in a sense, on evidence generation, critically important, but really in trying to define your place in the market.
Yeah, I think, you know, people will have different views on evidence generation. You can take the maybe more traditional academic review perspective and looking at, okay, what are the health outputs and what is the impact on the NHS? But for our type of business, you know, we will thrive by providing a service that our patients need and they feel value in using. So I think with any healthcare business, you've got to think about your end user. So for us, it's all about the patients and how is the patient experience? Are they comfortable using Flow? Do they get the service they need? But even if you're providing a service to the NHS, say, I don't know, for example, you've got a system that reduces administrative time on clinicians, you still have an end user, which is the clinician. So you need to understand what their pain points are and does your product actually address those pain points? And I think for us, it's regardless of whether you're using something directly in the NHS or whether it's direct to the patient like Flow, is never ever forget who the end user is and is your offering solving a real pain point for them, and then the benefits will come out of that, of solving that pain point.
Great. Elliot, again, a slightly different view from your point of view. But what stage did you start to consider evidence generation for your product?
Yes, I think it really depends how you define it. So we're like any other sort of like lean startup. So we kind of adopt all those good principles about like testing all your assumptions, really good user-centered design, A/B testing things with end users, which is a bit like research light, I would say. That's what I've learned. And I think all three of the companies here do that really well, sort of like work, like really understand the pain points, as Adam's saying. What we became part of DigitalHealth.London Accelerator as well, and it was there that we were introduced to yourself and others that kind of explained to us the importance of health economics, explained to us the importance of generating evidence, and we aren't a team of researchers and academics. So the challenges for us were kind of like figuring out where to even begin, what was required, the who, what, where, when, and why of evidence generation. That began at DigitalHealth.London, I would say.
Yeah, and I suppose let's move on then, I think, at this stage to a very related question, which is, we know that you've got a whole set of complex development agendas. So if you're going to have evidence generation as part of that, there need to be real drivers, such as requirements or incentives for it to become a priority. Starting with Adam, what do you think are your company's key drivers for evidence generation now? And how would you define the stage that you're at with Flow in your evidence generation journey?
Yeah, so I think there's probably two elements to what we're doing at the moment. Our mantra always is that laser focus on the patient experience. So it's about constant iterative feedback from our patients, whether it's to our customer service team or whether it's to the pharmacist directly, whether the feedback we get through surveys and workshops and split testing different features, for example, making sure that our product is just as accessible to a 20-year-old as it is to a 60-year-old. So there's a lot of kind of ongoing iterative work and having that two-way dialogue conversation with the patient. It's also then understanding the feedback and the impact of that service on them. So we work a lot. One of our main tools is, and it's very public, is our Trustpilot page, where we will always ask for patient feedback on the service. And what's interesting is hearing their feedback in terms of how it's helped their service. You know, we had a patient recently who's disabled and finds it very difficult to get to the door in time when someone knocks on the door. But the fact that he can live track it all the way to the door, he can actually get there in advance because he knows exactly when the delivery driver is going to arrive with his medication. So a very small thing, but it allows us to know that, okay, that has a real life benefit to the patient and a particular type of patient who has some challenges around that. I think the next step for us as a business is going, okay, where do we fit in the wider ecosystem of digital health? So looking at, for example, adherence to medication. One of the drivers of Flow was the founder, Nadeem. He had diabetes and lived a busy professional life and didn't really do as much as he should in terms of going to the pharmacy, and just hated having to stand in the queues, and therefore fell behind in his prescriptions and then kind of the knock-on effect of that. So what I think we need to do now in the next level is going, okay, we've got a data set now that is actionable. So we've got enough patients now to make some real conclusions or insights based on the behavior patterns of our patients. But now take that point and go, okay, by using Flow, have you increased your, for example, adherence to your prescription? So are you regularly taking your prescription as and when you have been prescribed by a clinician? And does that help with the longer term health economics of someone's ailment or condition not worsening to become an even bigger burden on the NHS? So I think that's our next step, which is probably a little bit more in that more traditional academic research space. But for us, it will always goes back to that, what is the patient experience and are we providing the service that they're looking for? And then that's always will be the basis for how we move forward.
Adam, that's really interesting. And a quick additional question, which I'll be asking others too. Do you have any specific incentives or any dedicated funding for research and evaluation? Or is this coming very much as a sort of afterthought?
We don't have any dedicated funding, but we do have a dedicated user research person within the company. So we do a lot of user-based research. They call it kind of UX research, and the user experience side of things is really important. But what we use is and it's quite a simple thing, but we use the Slack platform that allows for all the different channels, and all the feedback that comes in from patients comes in real time to everybody in the business. So whether you work in engineering or you work in marketing or you work in design, you know exactly what the impact we're having on the patient's experience at every point in the journey within the realms of patient confidentiality. So we always try and make sure that everybody's always laser focused, that everything you do has an impact on this. And we then need to understand that more so we can improve our service and our features to help patients access their healthcare in a more efficient and manageable way.
Thanks very much. Charlotte, would you like to address the same set of questions? You know, were there drivers, requirements and incentives for it to become a priority? And what are your company's key drivers for evidence generation right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that there are 3 functional areas within our company that evidence is generated to answer 3 questions. So 1, does it work? And so we put all of our products through RCTs because our intention for the product is to treat a condition. So much like a drug. And so therefore that confers a certain level of clinical risk, which requires the highest level of clinical evidence. And what we found really helpful was the NICE evidence generation guidelines that sets out the different classes of products and therefore what evidence is expected for that intention. So that's the first question. The second question is around, is it engaging? So to Adam's point, that evidence is really generated from our product, our engineering, our UX team. And that's kind of the bread and butter, I would say, of developing any kind of tech product. Then finally, does it give value to the buyer? So this is about health economics. This is about real world implementation. That's generated from our implementation program and our team. So, you know, I guess my message here is that there is evidence generated across a number of different areas, but particularly for big health, because we are taking on such a significant clinical risk, we need to take on RCTs to be able to demonstrate to a clinical audience, which quite rightly would be concerned about safety and efficacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have, I mean, clearly you have a mission, specific incentives and dedicated funding for research and evaluation. Was that built in to your business plan?
Yes, so we have a dedicated clinical research team, and that's growing to include health economics and outcomes research. We also have, you know, obviously our product team, but we also partner quite a bit with external universities who would then go for grant funding to then be able to run RCTs or other clinical trials in their setting. So for example, Daylight, our newest product, was a collaboration across US and also UK universities looking at the efficacy of that product in, you know, quite a wide variety of people, typically between 18 to 65 populations. So I would say that there's sort of internal funding, which is baked into our business plan. There's also external funding, which is typically grants, like from the NIHR and also Innovate UK that support us.
Great. And I think we'll come back to that, I'm sure, in the discussion. Elliot, same question to you. You know, when did you, what are your company's key drivers for evidence generation now, and at what stage do you think you're at in that journey?
Yeah, so crossing the do they like it bar was the first step. Then, as Charlotte says, does it work? How do you demonstrate whether it works? And because Infinity could be used across any care setting, and how one ward in one hospital may work could differ very much from how a ward in another hospital might work. So how do you build evidence around that that's transferable? But what we realized is that we had, like, in order to get to a buying decision, you had to demonstrate that it worked. And I think the separation that Charlotte made there, the distinction between whether it works and then also what are the outcomes to the system, are slightly different things. And we're now starting to look at that. We're trying to understand, if you can coordinate this many portering requests and this many EDs, how much time could be saved and how much money does that translate to, or how much capacity could be increased, and what are the health economics there? And because we don't have that expertise in our business, we work with external bodies to do research. So we'll work with the Academic Health Science Network partners on research because they have the expertise. They're working on other solutions as well. So they're learning how to do research on fast changing products, and they have that expertise, but also it's arm's length validation if it suggests that there's benefit to your solution.
Just very quickly, since you've mentioned arm's length, I think it's quite a key point. What was your feeling about that? Because I think companies struggle quite a lot with the idea of we can do most of this in-house, or do we need to do it arm's length?
I think it's really important commercially to do it arm's length, just from perception. I think you need expertise in-house to be able to manage that sort of relationship and conduct really good research. Yeah, that's what I would say about it.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'd like to concentrate now on the last of the sort of formalized questions, which is about how complicated, complex and opaque the evidence generation maze is. I was talking to somebody from another SME the other day who said it felt a bit like being afloat in a very large ocean in a very small dinghy, trying to work out what you were supposed to be doing in terms of starting on your evidence generation journey, and that it really helped to see that there were some other dinghies around, and some of the dinghies were sprouting sails and motors and going places, and other dinghies were sort of breached and shipping water. And I think one of the things we're trying to do with the webinar series and the generator program is to try and create a community, a forum in which these experiences can be shared, and a way of trying to identify ways of simplifying that journey and making it much less opaque. So questions to all of you really about what were the key pinch points in your journey through the maze or across the ocean, and if you can, mention any strategies or organizations or other key factors which were particularly helpful, or indeed any things that you found as being particular obstacles. Let's start with Adam.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the first challenges we had was just actually getting people to sign up to the application in the first place in order to start doing our approach to actual real-time data or real-time feedback from patients. I think, we've now got to a point where our patient numbers are large enough, and we've got a wide variety of cohorts of patients that you can start maybe drawing out some insights as to the impact of our operation on their health, on their overall health. I think that goal is very much internal for us, and I think that because of the service that we're offering, which is so unique and no one else is doing this same-day delivery option, it's hard to tie into data from other maybe third-party sources, because actually the service that we're doing is so fundamentally different from maybe what is already currently in the online space. So I think now we're at the stage where we can start looking at wider projects and potential collaborations with university partners to look at a more broader scope of the impact over a period of time. So I think the main pinch point was just getting started in the first place, but also really then trying to understand what we want to get out of that feedback from our patients and how that then would drive future services. I think the next stage for us is to look at, okay, we're now at a point where we've got data where we can provide real insights. So for example, pre-COVID, we have a list of medications where our top what number of medications we've dispensed that month, just neutral numbers, X prescription, X number of items, and we do that both for our private and NHS. And sertraline, which is used for antidepressant treatment at certain stages, went up by 1,500% pre-COVID to where it is now, both in the private and the NHS sector. And we can then dice that up to go, okay, what's it like in North London compared to South London, or London compared to Birmingham, where we're about to launch. And I think looking at that type of data to understand how different regions within England are treating or using particular medication could be interesting for a wider review around what's going on in that healthcare space. So yeah, I think the next stage for us is to formalize things and maybe look at how we can do more in-depth research with university partners.
Yeah, and how easy is it to do that? I mean, I think what you are saying, and you're in a particular situation, I think, with your company, that you're able to do a great deal in-house.
Yeah.
But if you are going to branch out into this more sort of representative, an academic kind of research or evidence generation, are there pinch points in trying to work out things like partnerships, identifying suitable academic partners, getting permissions and generating funding? Have you addressed those yet? Do they look to be difficult?
I think they, like always, it'll be challenging to get in front of the right person. I think for me, it's always about looking at the universities which specialize in your area, and you can start doing that with a bit of just simple desk research. I think for us, it's looking at universities that have a pharmacy element to their, whether it be that an undergrad or postgrad, looking in at around the digital healthcare space and trying to understand what the lecturers in these respective universities are doing. So I know, for example, UCL does a master's in strategic design in healthcare. So that's the type of organization that we would be looking at to go, okay, what are you guys doing? Does it align with what we're trying to do? And if you can do that, because, for example, a lot of academics have to produce reports and they have to produce publications because that's one of the KPIs that they're put against. So trying to identify, academics in your space that align with what you're trying to achieve, and then a simple discussion, you can never know where that goes. But there isn't like a Google for it. You just have to get out there and send emails and do your initial research and ask people for introductions as well.
So that brokerage is quite important, being able to find them. Okay, let's go from you, Adam, to Charlotte and ask the same question about pinch points in your, I think, very different journey through the maze.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the core challenges is that, yes, Sleepio is, a 10-year-old product, but it represents such a different mode of delivery in a treatment. At the moment, clinicians, if you broadly look at it, have a toolbox of surgical intervention, drugs, or behavioral change, which usually takes a huge amount of time to get access to. And what we're doing is we're taking behavior change, in the form of CBT, and turning it into a very standardized, destigmatized product that people can just jump into, use whenever they want. And so that kind of that sort of encapsulates what a digital therapeutic is. It's that intention to treat, as I sort of spoke about before. And there, because it's I would say a new class of digital health product, if I was going to use a kind of pharmaceutical term, there is that lack of understanding in the market around, the difference between a digital therapeutic and perhaps a wellness app, or, the difference between what we're trying to do and perhaps, what an EPR is trying to do. So there's that, which is a pinch point, which then creates a whole number of different other system challenges that relate to, one, standardization. So there is no standard reimbursement pathway that sets out the evidence requirements to be able to then prove yourself to a commissioner to then become reimbursed. And so, secondly, there are challenges around understanding what the standards are for cost effectiveness for a product like this. I was reflecting, around Sleepio. We're currently putting Sleepio through the NICE MedTech evaluation process. It's the first time that the NICE team are looking at a fully automated digital therapeutic. And it's raising a whole number of conceptual issues. So do we treat this like a drug? It's delivering a treatment at point of care. And therefore, do you need a QALY? And then you do post-market surveillance. Or do you treat this like any other digital product, like a diagnostic, where you're expecting costs to be taken out of the system, ideally within 1 year or two? And therefore, I guess our sort of pinch points really are around standards, the thresholds and the criteria for what good looks like, which relates to general kind of confusion, I think, in market understanding of what apps are and what digital therapeutics are.
So a need really to get some kind of consensus across the board that results from an intelligent and meaningful discussion that acknowledges that this is new and that you do need standards and thresholds. Interesting. Anything else that you've found, because you have run a number of randomized controlled trials, anything about that most people complain about the timescales and the complexity and the bureaucracy. Has that been an issue for big health, or have you managed to get through that?
That's a good question. And I wish I could answer that with slightly more in-depth knowledge, because I don't run the trials myself.
Sorry.
So, if I just remember what our research lead said to me, the bureaucracy of course is still there. The timing, the amount of effort it takes to write up the protocols, get everything agreed, etc., will still be there. But the actual implementation process is very quick because it's a completely digital product. You're testing out treatment at scale within a very short space of time. And the brilliant thing about this is that you can do it fully digitally. So Daylight was the first clinical trial that we did completely remotely. We managed to complete that within a very short space of time, comparatively with our much more kind of face-to-face methodology with Sleepio. So I wish I could answer more about that. I mean, if there's more I can get from our research lead, I'll certainly share it on.
That's great. And Elliot, same question for you, really. Pinch points.
Pinch points. So the first one was not knowing what evidence to generate. And I think because of that lack of consensus about what's needed, that the system is becoming much more of a meritocracy, I think. So good evidence will mean more rapid adoption, the better the evidence for your solution versus another. You'd like to think the well-evidenced ones are the ones that will be adopted, and I feel like that's happening more and more. But so it was figuring out what we needed to do, and it's like the appropriateness of the evidence that you generate at the stage of business that you're at in order to get to the next stage. That was really tough to figure out how to do that, and then who we should speak to about doing that. The how wasn't something we really worried about too much at that moment. And something Adam said earlier was like, the timing of the research will depend on your progress. So at the beginning, we didn't have very much data. Now we can, we've got 40,000 users submitting self-testing results. That's a large data set, and you can derive a huge amount of insight and benefit from that data. So we often feel like we're leaving a lot on the table because we're not capable of doing the evidence to demonstrate the saving. So we have to just focus on the ones that we can demonstrate. That's been a real challenge for us. Like, we've had to wait until we've got enough data in order to prove something.
And in terms, as I was asking of the others, in terms of finding appropriate, you were saying earlier, it's really important to have some sort of external evaluation and evidence generation. How's it been finding external partners, advice, and navigating some of the issues around permissions and confidentiality and all of that?
So for us, that we've been very lucky. So from the moment we joined DigitalHealth.London Accelerator, we were given some really good signposting and access to some really good people that could further sort of advise us. And that's sort of a drug that we've become a little bit addicted to. So we stay very close to this community of academics, researchers, health economists, because I think this is a constantly moving feast. It's improving all the time. So yeah, and so the same is true for the NHS Innovation Accelerator Programme. It's heavily evidence-based now, which I think is really important.
Great. I think at this stage, I'm going to leave the questions and hand over to Henry and Jean to begin a question and answer session, feeding, I think, on what's come in through the chat and other things. And we'll have a brief sort of summing up at the end. So thank you all very much, panelists. Stay there, and over to Henry and Jean.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks everyone. There's quite an active chat discussion around RCTs, and I think a number of people have been raising questions. So I'm just going to flag some of the points that come up in the chat. One is that there's a sense that the design principles and the gold standard of the RCT that suits pharma and medical products is still the threshold and model in use at the moment, even though there are a lot of problems with RCTs, including reliable data sets and statistical validity. So there's a lot of debate around the RCT. So my first question, I think I might pivot this towards Charlotte, is that the culture you feel you're operating in, the traditional pharma or medicines model of RCTs is what you're working with? And I mean, is your company perhaps able to respond to that because it was founded by an academic? And do you think that might be different from other types of digital health companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. In short, yes, partly due to that initial conversation around the intention to treat for our product. So with anything that has a claim to be made around treating, preventing, managing a condition, I feel as a clinician needs to have an RCT. That being said, there is, I totally understand the kind of myriad of other products that may support with that effort. And there is that question of, well, would an RCT be appropriate in this context? And I think we, to Paul's point, we need an intelligent discussion around what the thresholds are and what good looks like for the different classes of digital health products. Secondly, unfortunately, yes, I think we were really benefited by the fact that Professor Assey had about 30 years of clinical research under his belt, and so he just knew what needed to be done. This was the question, this was the model. These were the universities that we should be partnering with, and because he had that seniority, was able to pull those strings. Not to say that it was quick, but it got us on the right path. Does that necessarily mean that every digital therapeutic startup out there needs to have, a 30-year history in clinical research? No, not necessarily. But do we need to open up the barriers between startups and academia to try and enable better collaboration and shared incentives to get something like this started? Yes, I think we do.
I think that's a really good point, and it certainly came up in what Adam and Elliot were saying about this almost matchmaking function between finding the right academics and how much effort SMEs might have to make just to find the right people in these huge institutions that might be able to help and have the time. Charlotte, just while you're still on, we had another question from somebody who works in South London at the Maudsley NHS Trust, and they were interested to learn what the take-up has been of your product and what are the outcome measures you're using for your product. She realised that may still be ongoing, but wondered if you had any comments on that.
Yeah, happy to answer, but I also want to make sure that this isn't, this isn't a webinar about big health or our products. It's about evidence generation. So I wanted to make that really clear. I can perhaps share some data based on the last year during COVID-19 when we gave out daylight and sleep to all NHS staff. So we look at, from the denominator, the prevalence of anxiety and insomnia in that given population. So with that denominator and looking at where we are in terms of the data, is we are reaching on average 8% of that prevalence in a year. So far to date, we've had about 40,000 NHS staff go into our programs, start CBT, start that journey into therapy. That being said, you can see a lot of variability across the different distribution channels. And the main thing to ask is, is this distribution channel scalable and sustainable for the healthcare system? And what I mean by that is it embedded into clinical pathways? Is it being referred to through clinicians? Is it just part and parcel of how we do things within medicine? And that's, I think what we're doing with Scotland, where we're rolled out across 2 million in their population to try and answer, so developing that service model for scale elsewhere. Happy to give my email. I don't want to take over this webinar.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you very much, Charlotte. I've got a question now. Well, I'm going to, for both Elliot and Adam. And Adam, if maybe we could start with you. One of the comments is that we don't really have methods for thinking about system benefits when your products are introduced. And as we're discussing, many trials may look at individual or population health benefits, but what about actual health system benefits? Adam, do you have any comments on how you begin to think about that? You've spoken about research, user research, and trying to understand the need for the product. I wonder if you have any views on measuring system outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, because sometimes you'll see, NHS trusts will focus very much more on system benefits than actually what is the end benefit to the user, which is you and I as taxpayers and users of the NHS. And I think sometimes we get bogged down in the what is the benefit to the systems, and it must do X, Y, and Z, and we actually lose sight of the fact that there is an end user, you and I, at the end of this who need healthcare benefits. And that can come in different ways. It can be the fact that you're reducing clinicians' admin time on a ward, therefore they can spend an extra 4 or 5 hours a week doing actual clinical care, which is what we all want when we go into a hospital. I think from Flo's side of things, our system benefits, it's a difficult one to nail, and I think I've seen some companies who operate in our space who have maybe tried to show the system benefits, and maybe the rigor of their research doesn't really stand up to scrutiny. So there's a balance there where if you're going to go down the line, you're going to say, look, there's an X, Y, and Z system benefit to what we do, then you've really got to make sure that your research stacks up and backs up any assertions that you make, because you can actually cause more damage than good if you don't. But I think from a Flo's perspective, again, for us, it all comes back to the patient and to the end user, and we're I appreciate that we're quite unique in that respect. But that's what we focus on. The next stage is then to kind of maybe make the wider point to the healthcare system that actually, digital pharmacies like Flo and the service we use are a benefit and not necessarily a negative, because I think there is some people within the healthcare sector might have a particularly negative view on online pharmacies as a general view. So I think if you can show the impact you've had on your patient's life, and you can then make that into a real proper study that can then show the wider healthcare system that there are actually benefits to using an online service, then I think that's maybe an area that we can go into when we're at maybe a bigger size and have more resources to do that.
So I'm going to ask, thank you. I'm going to go back to Elliot and then come back maybe again to that point. Elliot, are you finding something similar about, you introduce your product to healthcare trusts and organisations. When we're thinking of benefits, are you looking at the organisation or a wider system? How do you approach that?
Thinking entirely about the finance director and the trust and what they care about. So that ultimately but I have good news. Like, so the structure of the integrated care systems that we now have does create an incentive to demonstrate that you're moving KPIs for decision makers in the integrated care system that make decisions for all the trusts, all of the CCGs. And they're driven to have a better operating health system with better outcomes for their entire cohort. So now there's a reason to demonstrate system benefits. But again, there's no consensus about what these KPIs are, and if you move them by this much, how much value has that created? But that will come, and I think it's companies like ours that are going to do a lot of that foundational research. And working with the community of academics, we're creating the infrastructure around that. So we're writing the scripts as we go. As someone mentioned in the chat, it's about working together. I think a lot innovation for me, it's a really dirty word, but it sort of means new. So if it's new, there probably isn't evidence for it. So if you want to try this thing, we need to share this risk together and do the research together, I think. So that a bit more collaborative approach will win out, I think.
No, it's really, really helpful. There's a fantastic question in the chat, and I'd like to put it to all of you actually, which is from Wesley. Have you changed your investor pitch based on the evidence you have generated? Elliot, if we start with you, and then we'll ask Adam and Charlotte.
All the time. Yeah, all the time.
You're changing as you go, are you?
Oh, see, I think that's a really important point. Like it was a change in mindset. This is not, you're going to produce one RCT and you're done. It was, oh, we're going to always need to be continuously producing evidence of our impact, because we're continuously improving the product. We're doing continuous integration every day. So we need methods for sort of like continuously evaluating, monitoring, and generating good evidence. So that's what we're now doing.
So it's an evolving pitch and evolving evidence. Okay,
Yeah,
Charlotte, yeah. I'm going to ask this of you. Has your company, does it change what its pitch for investors based on what evidence you're getting?
Yeah, so this is definitely a question for Peter, our co-founder, but based on what I've seen, yes, basically, because the more evidence that we generate, and hopefully it's to answer key questions from our buyers, the more that we can show product market fit, therefore higher value.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And Adam?
Yeah, I think, evidence is really important when you're talking to investors, but it also depends on where you are in your life cycle. I mean, some investors will be, is there actually a business? So before we actually got live with Flow, people were questioning whether actually anybody would want to use the same day delivery service. So, well, we proved that just by our patient numbers and revenue growth and everything else on the back of it. We're now in later stage investments where they've kind of accepted the fact that the service that we're offering is one of value. The question is, can you scale that to the point where you want it to do? So the evidence is completely different. It's about, what's your unit economics, what's your cost of customer acquisition, all the kind of really financial stuff really that drives the next stage of that investment. But for us, seeing some, we can say to people, well, we can say to investors, right, we think that by doing this will help X, Y, and Z. But there's nothing better for them to go on an independent third-party site like Trustpilot and just read it for themselves. For an investor, that's one thing they're looking for, is that product market fit. But I think it depends on where you are in your investment cycle and where you are as a business. Because if you're a business generating revenue and it's maybe not at the levels that an investor wants, they might not be that interested in your evidence that that you've done this research, because they'll say, well, actually your monthly revenue rates are not high enough for us to do this investment. So yes, it can help you, but you've also got to understand what the fundamental economics of your business and what those margins are and how that's working. So different type of evidence, but they're both important at different stages.
And it's really interesting, because as an academic, and something Henry and I have spoken about, is you can get products which have a high evidence base and don't get commercial traction, that spin out from universities. So it's very interesting where we see companies that actually you're doing the commercial and in user research and really finding out the fit for your product out there, plus you're trying to do the academic and validation work in tandem. So clearly highly evolving. I'm going to hand over to Henry, who's been very active on the chat, to see if there's any questions or points he would like to put to the panel, or anything coming from the chat. Henry, are you there?
Hello, everyone. We're having a very vigorous discussion in the chat, including about the value of an ongoing forum for people to talk about all of these issues, which is something I think various people are keen on, although it needs investment to be done properly. I thought Lorenzo from Aldaba asked a very interesting question right at the beginning, where we talked about how his company has moved away from large-scale quantitative data gathering, be that trial or some other method, to focus more on user case studies, which can give a richer narrative sort of evidence, and the use of qualitative data. Elliot at the beginning sort of talked about UX, etc., as research light in a sense. Do we need to do more to say, well, this isn't research light, this is equally valid research that has just as much value in evaluation as quantitative methods? I wondered if all of the panel had thoughts about that.
Go on. So our UX research has become a lot more scientific and rigorous as a result of it. So we used to sort of just interview people very informally and then sort of follow our own bias and assumptions. We now sort of like root that stuff out a bit better by doing things like asking people to complete a standard journey in Infinity and putting the same people through it. It's controlled environment, and then measuring the outcome of those 100 journeys and working out if that sort of thing we've become a lot more grown up about. And I think that I think what I happen to know Lorenzo's team and products and what they do, and so for what they do, I absolutely agree that this mix of like going deep and understanding the case study and telling stories is actually much more important to driving adoption and understanding the benefit of what they do than perhaps a large quantitative study might happen. And I think it just emphasizes the point. It's about the right research for the right solution at the right time.
Charlotte, Adam, do you have thoughts?
I think they've all been covered. It was really quite a rich discussion. No, nothing more from me.
No, I haven't much to add, but I think it's, for me, it's all about focusing on that end user. But sometimes the end user can be a clinical administrator in a hospital. So it's understanding, are you solving a pain point? And I think, yeah, you can go right into the kind of the nuts and bolts of it. But when you're first starting, you've really got to understand what are the pain points and what am I addressing? And even if you're trying to understand, I've got maybe potentially a new drug and how's that going to work, you still got to understand what the pain points and what this new drug is going to solve. So I think never lose sight of who are you pitching this business to, who are you selling this business to, understand their journey and their pain points. What KPIs do they have as the CFO of an NHS trust? Does your business, does what your product or what you're offering align with that? And you can change that depending on who you're talking to and what you're doing. But whatever you're doing, don't ever forget who the end beneficiary is of that product and what that product is looking to solve. And then there's a myriad of ways to build up the evidence base to support that.
So to come on to another topic, what has all of your experiences been of commissioners? The role of commissioners has come up in the chat. And do you feel commissioners understand what evaluation is appropriate for your product? Do you feel commissioners are demanding particular sorts of evaluation, focusing on particular issues which aren't necessarily representative of what makes a digital product useful?
Forgive me for interrupting, but guys, I'm going to ask you to keep to 1 minute to that very important topic, because we need to be able to wrap this up so that everybody can get on to the next things. But excellent question. Brief answers, please.
No.
It doesn't get any briefer than that.
They don't know, but also because it's taking us years to figure out what is good evidence for Infinity. Like, how are they going to know in 5 minutes of meeting this new thing how to demonstrate its value? I don't think it's their job to figure that out either, but no, they don't know.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Anybody had a really good experience? I was, Charlotte, wondering whether you might have had, seeing as you're closer to the sort of general acceptance of what is evidence.
Mixed bag. So I'm gonna shout out Scotland here. So they really understand, the value of what they call computerized CBT, which is a very old term, but essentially is digital therapeutics, and have been running this for about 5 to 6 years across a national CCBT program. They have a clear process, a pathway, there's a reimbursement tied to meeting certain access targets, for example. And, it's just a wonderful system to work in. Have I seen that level of maturity and understanding around the behavior change required, the expectations, the comparators to your product and what good looks like in commissioning within England? Not necessarily. And I think that's no fault of anyone. I think it's just to Elliot's point, we haven't been educated, the market's still growing and the industry is still developing. But the sooner we get, a sort of widespread education program in place, so everyone's talking from the same hymn sheet, then that would be brilliant. And it would definitely help us innovators to navigate the system better.
Great. I'm going to come in and tie things up at that point. First of all, by thanking our speakers who've been absolutely brilliant, and really congratulating everybody. I don't know you have to be congratulated on a chat, but my goodness, every now and again I look at the chat and there's an awful lot that's been going on there. Many, many thanks to Henry and Jean for fielding that and getting the questions. Just some key points that occur to me that have come out of this, and no doubt, well, I hope that will continue. But I think there seems to be a real consensus that evidence generation is key to pitching your product, and it evolves as the evidence accumulates. But of course, it sits alongside other evidence like money and financial revenue generation. That it's key to open up the barriers between businesses and academia and identify, as somebody said, shared incentives, because that idea that you get external validity is really important. That's come out. I think the idea of research light and challenging the current view that unless you've got a randomized controlled trial, you haven't got evidence. Very, very important and really interesting that came out of this discussion. And I think the need really to be able to identify and have methods that constitute acceptable KPIs for health system benefits. And perhaps the sort of overall umbrella conclusion that I'm very interested that everybody's sort of come to is this question about an intelligent discussion about what does constitute and what do constitute appropriate thresholds and standards, and how can we make sure that commissioners and businesses are matched up in all of this. And the idea of a forum is something that certainly within the generator we've been thinking about. And I think great to hear that is an idea that resonates with all of you. So thank you all. Thanks to the organizers of this. Thanks to the speakers. Thanks to the audience. We will be having some comms afterwards. And we invite you warmly to the next 3 webinars in this series, and hopefully to the following series that will follow after that. So thank you all very much indeed, and enjoy the rest of the day.